Aloha and welcome. The Maui Economic Development Board is very pleased to present to you today this video on filling out the PPP loan forgiveness application. The SBA has released Form 3508EZ, and that's the form you're going to use to apply for PPP loan forgiveness. So we're going to walk through an example, and I'm going to show you how I calculated the numbers that you're going to need to populate the PPP loan forgiveness application with. So let's take a look. So here's what the form looks like. We are going to start at the top here and just populate it with some basic information. Here's where you're going to put your legal name. If your DBA or trade name is different than your legal name, then you would indicate that here. Your business address is 1234 Main Street or wherever. Your EIN or SSN would go here, your business phone here, primary contact person here, your email address. And then it's going to ask you for things like what is your current SBA PPP loan number and what is your current lender PPP loan number. This is for tracking. For the purposes of my experiment here, I'm going to use $100,000 as the PPP loan amount. It's just easier to calculate round numbers. And then my loan disbursement date, or the date that it hit my bank account, is 4/22/20. That's April 22nd. When I applied 2.5 months ago, I had 6 employees. However, at the time of forgiveness, which is the time that I'm filling out this form, I had 4. If you have an EIDL advance amount, you would put that here, and the EIDL application number would go here. For the purposes of my example, I'm going to use a weekly payroll period. That means I pay people every week. Typically, the pay period would end on a Sunday, so it would go from Monday to Sunday. But we need to calculate what this covered period actually is. And what the covered period is a period of 56 days, or the disbursement date plus 55 days. So let's go look at what that actually means. So if my PPP funded date was 4/22/20, then what we're going to have to calculate is 55 days after that, and that is 6/16/20. So my covered period, my 8-week covered period, starts on the day that I got the funds, and it ends 56 days later. Now let's look at a calendar and see how this works out. So it turns out that it doesn't work out so well for me. The 22nd, the day that my PPP funded, was on a Wednesday. This does not coincide with my payroll schedule. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it forward so that it starts on the same day as my pay period starts. So I'm going to push it forward to the 27th and see what that does. So it's completely okay for me to choose an alternative 8-week covered period start. So if I choose 4/27/20, that gives me an 8-week period that begins on 4/27 and ends on 6/21. Now let's go back to the calendar and see how that works. So if I start then on April 27th, then it now matches my pay periods, because every week of the 8 weeks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, is going to end on the 21st of June. That gives me 8 weeks of covered period that matches my payroll schedule. So what I did was I went back to the form here, and I'm able to fill in the alternative payroll covered period of 4/27/20 to 6/21/20, and what I'm going to do is I'll leave the covered period blank. Now, if your loan's in excess of $2 million, unfortunately, you're going to have to check that box. And what that does is it almost guarantees you that you're going to have to get audited. So that brings us to line 1, and that is payroll and non-payroll costs. So what are payroll costs? That's the first thing we're going to have to calculate. I jumped over real quick to the instructions for line 1, and there's really a lot of things that you need to take out of this, but you should really understand these instructions. So take a look at this before you're filling it out. Now, there's 3 kinds of payroll compensation. There's cash compensation. That's when you pay somebody a check or you fund their medical leave or sick leave or any of that type of stuff. There are employee benefits, which are benefits like health insurance, 401k, state and local taxes such as unemployment that are the business portion. And then the last thing is owner compensation. That's treated a little different than employee compensation. There are limits that you need to understand with compensation, and it's pretty much based around $100,000 as an annual salary. So let's take a look at some of those limits. I won't spend a huge amount of time on this because you can download this PowerPoint presentation, or you can just look at the instructions. But basically, it's centered around $100,000 annual salary. So if you take $100,000 and divide it by 52 weeks in a year, it gives you this number of 1,923. 1,923 times 8 is 15,385. So the owner's portion and the employee's portion both are capped at the equivalent of $100,000 of annual salary. Now, the 24-week limits are a little different, but for now, let's just focus on the 8-week limits because that's the example we're going with. In order to calculate how much I paid all of my employees in cash compensation, I created this table, little Excel table, and I put my 8 weeks of covered period across the top, and then I put my employees down the side. Now remember I said I had 6 employees before. Here the 6 are, and I'm not counting myself as the owner. That's why I'm bold in italics that way, is to identify me as an owner, just to keep me separate. So basically there's 4 categories of people. There's owners, there are employees who make the equivalent of over $100,000, and there are employees who make the equivalent of under $100,000. And then there's employees that did not come back at all. You can see that both John and Wayne did not return to work, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in just a bit. Now, I've applied the limits here. Again, $2,000 times 8, that's $16,000. I can't report $16,000. I can only go to the cap, which is $15,384 for both the owner and for Donnie here, who's over the $100,000. And just as a little cross check here, if you take 2,000 times 52, you know that's $104,000. That's why it's a little too much. So down here, I've added all of these together to get a total of $56,869. But I've also broken out the owner portion, the people who are under $100,000 portion, and the people who are over $100,000. If you have to fill out the long form, you are going to need to know that separately. For the easy form, it's not critical, but I've included it there anyway. So I know that the amount of money that I've paid in cash compensation to my employees and owners, the line 1 amount, adds up to $56,869. However, that is not 60%, but there's other payroll costs that I need to add in that are legitimate payroll costs. And let's take a look at what they might be. So there are other forms of payroll costs, and what I did was I created another table. The table has the same dates as above because, again, you're limited to that 8-week period. So what I did was I entered the amount of company health insurance, employer paid 401k match, and then unemployment insurance, which gives me a total of $12,000 of additional payroll costs, which if I add to the cash compensation from the above calculation, which was 56.8, I'm at a total payroll cost of $68,869.23. And it's pretty obvious that that's higher than 60%. So let's go ahead and populate the form with that $68,000. So that's it. That's how I calculated line 1. That's how we get $68,869 by adding up all the payroll costs. Now let's look at lines 2, 3, and 4. Those are not payroll costs. Those are other costs that are non-payroll, but they are legitimate as well. So let's take a look at business mortgage interest, business rent, and business utility payments. And in order to calculate those, I've created another table in a spreadsheet, so let's take a look at that. So here's a table I created for non-payroll costs, and it's the same period of performance, it's the same covered period across the top, but now what I've done is I've added 2 rent payments, 2 electric payments, water, telephone, internet. I left business mortgage interest blank. I didn't have a business mortgage interest, but if you do have a mortgage, then you're allowed to you're allowed to use the interest here. So this is about $8,360 worth of utilities and $20,000 worth of rent. So now I'm going to go back to the form and populate that. Again, it's just adding up all the expenses that I had across that 8-week covered period. So here I am back at the form, and I've populated my mortgage interest with 0, my lease and rent payments with $20,000, my business utility payments at $8,360. Line 5 is asking me just to add lines 1, 2, 3, and 4, which I've done here at $97,229. Line 6 asks for my PPP loan amount, that's $100,000, very straightforward. And line 7 asks me to divide line 1 by 60%. And that gives me a number that if I did not spend a lot of money on payroll, then this number would be lower. And then the forgiveness amount is simply the number that is the smallest of lines 5, 6, and 7. Now that's an 8-week example. Let's take a look and see what 24 weeks does. One of the things that changes with a 24-week covered period is that the date that you receive the funds, that's the first date. There is no alternative covered period. And you get 24 weeks instead of just 8. So 24 weeks after 6/18/20 is 12/3/20. So my new covered period is going to be from 6/18/20 to 12/3/20. Before we go any further, let's go back and look at the limits on cash compensation, because at 24 weeks things change. The maximum cash employee compensation is now $46,154. Again, using the same formula we talked about before, if you take $100,000 divided by 52 and then multiply that by 24, it equals $46,154. So the most you could ever record for any one employee is $46,000. For the owners, it's significantly different in the 24-week period. The owner is only allowed to have a cap of $20,833, or whatever was on your 2019 Schedule C divided by 12 times 2.5, whichever is less. So it's the same sort of calculation. If you take $100,000 and divide it by 12 and then multiply it by 2.5, it equals $20,833. If you have people that make over $100,000, you need to pay attention to this. And if your owner's compensation is derived from a Schedule C, you're going to need to pay attention to that as well. So I know I'm going to need to complete line 1, and in order to complete line 1, I'm doing the same thing as I did before. I created a table, and I have my employees down the side, and I have my pay periods up above. Now you'll note that this does not go all the way to 24 because I don't need to. By the time I get to period 11, I'm at $55,000, which is close to 60%. But I know that I have other payroll costs that I still need to calculate, like unemployment, 401k, that type of thing. So I created a separate table here. I have to pay very close attention to the owner compensation to make sure it doesn't go over the $20,833. I also have to reduce salaries if someone makes over $100,000. I think you'll remember from a previous example that 2,000 times 52 is $104,000. So I won't be able to give Donnie the full amount. I'll only be able to compensate him at the number of weeks that he worked times that 1,923 number, and that's going to equal 21,153. These people down here, again, they made under $100,000. Not that concerned about that. That's a separate category. And then I had the same two people that didn't come back. Now, I've got $55,000 of total, $20,833 for the owners, $13,600 for people who made under 100K, and $21,153 for people who made over 100K. I've tracked those separately. But we know that there's other payroll costs that we need to add in there. So let's find out about them. So this is going to be a little tricky to read, but the point of it is that I am able to capture other allowable payroll costs across a much longer period. In the 8-week example, I could only capture allowable payroll costs for 8 weeks. However, in this example, I'm going from 6/21/20 clear through until 10/18 because that falls within my period, my covered period. So let's take a look at the totals. And what I did was I made that a little bigger so you could read it, but you may remember from above we had $55,586 of cash compensation. In addition, we have $20,000 more of other allowable payroll costs for a total of $75,576 of total payroll costs. That includes insurance, employer 401k match, unemployment insurance, as well as the compensation of all of the employees, owners, whether they made over or under $100,000. So let's go back to the form and populate that. So here we are back at the form, and a couple of things I want to make note of. In this example, this 24-week example, my PPP loan disbursement date was 6/18/20. I don't even have the choice for an alternative period because now it's 24 weeks. So 24 weeks from 6/18/20 is 12/3/20. So that's my covered period. I'm able to go down here and populate my payroll costs. Those were $75,586. And the next things that I need to calculate are lines 2, 3, and 4, which are my mortgage interest, rent, and utility payments. Again, I created a table that adds these things up, and I've got my mortgage interest, lease, electric, gas, water, telephone, these things down the side. Then I have the same covered period across the top, starting on 6/18, and I'm adding in these costs. So the point I'm trying to make here is that instead of just being limited to 8 weeks of costs, the new way to calculate this allows you to go as long as you need to spend the money up until, of course, 24 weeks. So let's go take this. We've got $15,000, which is 3 months. In the earlier example, I could only use 2. And then I've got some utility payments down here as well. So let's take a look and add these. I got $15,000 worth of business mortgage interests, and then I've got another $8,000 some worth of utilities. So let's go populate the table, or let's go populate the form. And here we are back at the form, and now what I can do is I can put in my $15,000 worth of rent. I can put in my $9,000 worth of utilities. Line 5 is just asking me to add the lines 1 through 4 above. That in this case is $99,626.85. The PPP loan amount was for $100,000, and the payroll cost in line 1 of $75,000 divided by 0.6 equals $125,000. So line 8 is simply the forgiveness amount of the smaller of whichever of the 3 lines that are above, and in this case it's $99,626.85. So I've jumped back to the form instructions, and the checklist for using SBA Form 3508EZ, you have to be able to check one of these 3 boxes in order to use this form. But if you comply and are careful in your planning, this should be no problem at all. The first box simply states that it's for self-employed individuals who don't have employees. They can use this form. The second and third one are similar but different. The first part of each of them says that you didn't reduce anybody's salary by more than 25% and you didn't pay anybody more than $100,000. It's the same in both of these two, exactly the same. This, it's an and, not an or, and you didn't reduce the number of employees or the average paid hours of employees. That's the key. You can ignore reductions from the inability to rehire people who you couldn't backfill or refused to come back to work. You don't have to, that does not count against you. In the third example here, if you were unable to operate during the covered period because of compliance with requirements, and I'm thinking like restaurants, that type of thing, because of guidelines established by the following places, then you also don't need to worry about FTE reduction for those employees, and you can use this form. So there's a walkthrough of both an 8-week and a 24-week covered period. There are some subtle differences between the two. Is one any better than the other? Well, if you can cover all of your costs in that 8-week period, then why not? Some people just want to get it out of the way and get it over with. Others want to use the full 24 weeks, but the key is to make sure that you have restored the same number of employees that you had when this whole thing started. So, little shout out quickly to the Office of Economic Development. Thank you very much for all of your support over the years, Maui County, and aloha.